The air in her lungs felt stolen, replaced by the bitter frost of betrayal. Isabella clutched the positive pregnancy test in her trembling hand, a tiny secret she'd flown across the country to share. This was supposed to be the perfect moment, the triumphant arrival at the new life her husband, Julian, had built for them. She stood at the marble entryway of their colossal mansion, a palace he called our future. But as she stepped inside, the sound of a soft melody reached her ears, a song meant for a wedding aisle, and there, reflected in a floor-to-ceiling mirror, was a woman in a magnificent white gown. It was a gown Isabella had never seen on a woman she knew all too well. This wasn't her future. This was her nightmare. The California sun was a benevolent god casting a golden sheen over the rolling hills of Napa Valley. For Isabella Rossi, that gold was the color of her life. At 26, she was married to Julian Croft, a man whose name was synonymous with tech innovation and old money prestige. Their love story was the stuff of modern fairy tales, a whirlwind romance, a dazzling society wedding, and a future that promised to be as bright and boundless as the Pacific horizon. Isabella traced the rim of her coffee cup, her gaze drifting to the panoramic view from their San Francisco penthouse. They had been married for 2 years, and while Julian's work often took him away, his affection had always felt like a constant, a lighthouse guiding her through the occasional loneliness. He was currently finalizing the last details of their true home, a sprawling estate in Napa he'd christened the Serafina Estate, a testament, he said, to her angelic presence in his life. He'd been there for 3 months, overseeing every detail, promising a grand reveal that would be the start of their family life. A smile played on her lips as her hand drifted down to her still flat stomach. The secret she held was the final perfect piece of their puzzle. 2 days ago, a simple test had confirmed her deepest wish: she was pregnant. She had pictured telling Julian 1,000 times. Under the stars on the new veranda of the Serafina, over a candlelit dinner, he would have arranged her hand, covering his, as she whispered of the news that would change their lives forever. But patience had never been her strong suit. The desire to see his face, to be in his arms as she told him, was an irresistible force. A surprise visit is exactly what he needs, she'd told her best friend Chloe over the phone. He's been working himself to the bone. I want to bring the celebration to him. Chloe, ever the pragmatist, and a razor-sharp litigator, had sounded a note of caution. Are you sure Izzy men like Julian? They live by their schedules. A surprise can sometimes throw a wrench in the works. It's a good wrench, Isabella had laughed, dismissing the concern. The best wrench, he'll be thrilled. So she booked a flight, her heart aflutter, with the kind of giddy excitement she hadn't felt since their wedding day. The drive from the local airport to the estate was a journey through paradise. Ancient oak trees lined the private road, their leaves dappling the sunlight. Vineyards stretched out in immaculate rows, the grapes heavy on the vine. And then she saw it. The Serafina estate was not a house. It was a monument. A symphony of Tuscan architecture and modern glass, it stood proudly on a hill overlooking the entire valley. It was more magnificent, more imposing than any of the pictures Julian had sent. A lump of pure joy formed in her throat. This was their home, the place their child would grow up. She parked her rental car, her hands slightly clammy on the steering wheel. Julian's sleek black Aston Martin was parked near the grand entrance, but there were other cars too, a Range Rover, a Mercedes sedan, caterers perhaps, or decorators for the finishing touches. It only added to her excitement. The heavy oak doors were slightly ajar. She pushed one open, stepping into a foyer that was cathedral-like in its scale. A double staircase of polished marble swept upwards, meeting at a landing before a colossal window that framed the valley beyond. The air smelled of fresh lilies and roses. For a moment, she was so overwhelmed by the grandeur that she didn't register the music. It was a soft instrumental version of a familiar song. Pachelbel's Canon in D. Her song. The song she had walked down the aisle to, a strange, cold unease began to snake its way through her joy. Why would Julian be playing that? Was he feeling sentimental? "Julian," she called out, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Honey." "I'm here." There was no answer, only the continuing melodic refrain of the music. She walked further in her heels, clicking softly on the marble. The main hall opened into a grand ballroom, a space designed for hundreds of guests. Champagne flutes were arranged in a glittering pyramid on one table. Canapés sat untouched on silver trays. White roses and peonies were everywhere, arranged in breathtaking displays. It wasn't set up for a reveal. It was set up for an event. A wedding. Isabella's breath hitched. A surprise for me, she thought, a wild, improbable hope flickering within her. A vow renewal. But that didn't make sense. Why wouldn't he have told her to come? She moved towards the far end of the ballroom, towards a set of tall, arched windows that overlooked the back gardens. And there, standing before a full-length gilded mirror, was a woman. The woman was a vision in white. A couture wedding gown, beaded with what looked like thousands of tiny pearls, hugged her slender frame. A gossamer veil was pinned in her perfectly coiffed blonde hair. Isabella knew that hair. She knew that posture. As Isabella watched, frozen in the doorway, the woman adjusted the veil, her reflection staring back at her. Her lips curved into a triumphant, satisfied smile. It was a smile Isabella had seen before at charity galas and corporate events, always on the arm of some visiting dignitary or rival CEO. It was Amelia Thorne, the daughter of Marcus Thorne, Julian's biggest business rival. The blood drained from Isabella's face. The pregnancy test in her purse suddenly felt like a lead weight. The world tilted on its axis, the beautiful music turning into a mocking, discordant dirge. Why was Amelia Thorne in her house? Why was she wearing a wedding dress? The answer came in a gut-wrenching wave of nausea. She backed away slowly, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a sob. She needed to get out to unsee this. But it was too late. Her heel caught on the edge of a rug, and she stumbled, knocking over a small side table with a crash. A vase of lilies shattered on the marble floor. The music stopped. Amelia Thorne spun around, her eyes wide with surprise, which quickly morphed into a look of cold, unveiled contempt. And at that exact moment, Julian Croft walked into the room. He was dressed in a tailored tuxedo, a white rose pinned to his lapel. His hair was perfect, his smile was bright, and it died the instant he saw Isabella standing amidst the wreckage of the lilies, her face a mask of utter devastation. Isabella. He breathed his voice a ghost of the one she loved. What are you doing here?" The question, so absurdly inadequate for the horror of the moment, broke the spell. The ice in Isabella's veins turned to fire. The love, the joy, the hope she had carried with her on the flight, it all curdled into a singular, agonizing question that clawed its way out of her throat. "What am I doing here, Julian?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a rage she had never known. "The better question is, what is she doing in my husband's house? Wearing a wedding dress?" The silence that followed was heavier and more suffocating than any tomb. Julian stood frozen between the two women, his wife clutching her stomach as if to protect their unborn child from the scene, and his mistress standing defiantly in the gown that was meant to seal a union of betrayal. The fairy tale had just ended, and a nightmare had begun. The tableau held for an eternity. Isabella the picture of broken trust, Julian a statue of guilt, and Amelia a predator whose surprise had turned to smug possession. It was Amelia who broke the silence, her voice as smooth and cold as the marble floor. "Well, Julian," she said, her eyes flitting dismissively over Isabella as if she were a piece of misplaced furniture. "Aren't you going to introduce us? Though I suppose we've met." Julian finally moved, taking a step not towards Isabella, but instinctively defensively towards the center of the room. "Isabella, listen. This is not what it looks like." Isabella let out a hollow, bitter laugh that sounded alien even to her own ears. "Not what it looks like? Are you blind, Julian? Or do you think I am? There is a woman who is not your wife wearing a wedding dress in a house decorated for a wedding. What part of that am I misinterpreting?" Her voice rose with each word, shaking with the force of her pain. "She's right, Julian." "It's exactly what it looks like," Amelia chimed in, stepping forward. She moved with a liquid grace, the pearl-beaded dress shimmering around her. "He was just about to make an honest woman of me." The words hit Isabella with the force of a physical blow. "Make an honest you?" She couldn't form a coherent sentence. Her mind was a maelstrom of confusion and agony. This wasn't a fling. This wasn't a one-night mistake. This was a parallel life, a plan, a wedding. Today. "Shut up, Amelia." Julian snapped his gaze, finally locking on Isabella's. The panic in his eyes was real, but it was the panic of being caught, not the sorrow of having wronged her. "Izzy, please, let's go somewhere private. We can talk about this." "Private?" she shrieked, the last of her composure shattering. "You want to talk about this in private? You were going to marry her." "Julian." "Today? While I was at home, dreaming of our future, you were here preparing to marry her." She gestured wildly at Amelia, her hand trembling violently. "It was complicated," Julian stammered, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up for the first time. "It was a business arrangement. A merger. Her father. A business arrangement?" Isabella's voice dropped to a dangerously low whisper. The raw grief was hardening, cooling into something sharp and brittle. "So that's all I was. A previous business arrangement that was being liquidated today." "No, of course not. I love you, Izzy." The words sounded profane in the context of the scene. They were an insult to everything they had shared. "Love me." She took a step closer, her eyes boring into his. "You don't know the meaning of the word. I flew here today to tell you something. Something that I thought would be the happiest moment of our lives." Her hand instinctively went to her stomach again. She wanted to scream it, to hurl the news at him like a weapon, but she couldn't. It was too precious to be tainted by this sordid, horrific moment. She would keep this one thing for herself. Amelia, seeing her chance to deliver the final killing blow, smirked. "Oh, let me guess. You redecorated the penthouse." "Don't worry, darling. Julian's about to own a portfolio of properties. You'll be well taken care of." She turned to Julian. her voice softening into a possessive purr. "Tell her, Julian. Tell her why this had to happen." Julian looked trapped. His face was pale, his eyes darting between the two women. "Croft Industries. We've had some financial difficulties. A downturn. The merger with Thorne consolidated. It was the only way to secure the company, to secure our legacy." "Our legacy," Isabella repeated the word with venom. "You mean your legacy. Built on my back, on my trust." She looked at him. Truly looked at him, and for the first time she didn't see the charming, ambitious man she'd fallen in love with. She saw a weak, desperate stranger who would sacrifice anything and anyone for his ambition. Her gaze fell on Amelia's neck. Draped against her skin was a necklace, a delicate, winding serpent of white gold and diamonds, its eyes emerald chips. Isabella's heart stopped. She knew that design. The Bavulgari Serpenti necklace. A cold dread, colder than anything she had felt so far, washed over her. She reached into her purse, passed the pregnancy test, and her fingers closed around a velvet box. Julian had given it to her a month ago, a just because gift. He'd said it reminded him of her seductive, timeless and precious. Inside was the very same necklace. He had given them both the exact same symbol of his love. The duplicity was so breathtakingly audacious, it was almost insane. This was never about love. Was it? Isabella said, her voice eerily calm. It was about assets. And you, Amelia, are just a more valuable asset than I am right now. Amelia's smug expression faltered for a second, stung by the comment. At least I'm an asset with a future. What are you? Before Isabella could respond, the sound of measured, heavy footsteps echoed from the foyer. A woman appeared in the doorway of the ballroom. She was in her late 60s, impeccably dressed in a Chanel suit the color of steel. Her silver hair was coiffed into a severe, elegant bun, and her face, though lined, was hard and unforgiving. It was Genevieve Croft Julian's mother, the matriarch of the Croft dynasty. She took in the scene with a glacial calm that was far more terrifying than any outburst. Her eyes, the same shade of calculating blue as her son's, swept over Isabella, lingered on Amelia's dress, and finally settled on Julian. "Julian," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a shard of glass. "I heard a crash. I see you've failed to manage the situation. How utterly disappointing." She didn't address Isabella at all as if she were an apparition. She walked directly to Amelia. "My dear Amelia, you look stunning. A perfect bride for a Croft." She adjusted a fold in the wedding dress, a gesture of ownership. Then she turned her icy gaze to Isabella. "Miss Rossi," she said pointedly, using Isabella's maiden name. "I believe you are trespassing. This is a private event." The insult was so profound, so utterly dehumanizing that for a moment Isabella couldn't breathe. She wasn't his wife. She wasn't family. She was Miss Rossi, a trespasser. "This is my home," Isabella managed to say, her voice cracking. Julian and you are a chapter that has now concluded," Genevieve stated as if closing a ledger. "Circumstances have changed. The family requires stability, and that is what the union with the Thornes provides. I'm sure you can understand. It's just business." There it was again. That phrase. It's just business. The Croft family motto, apparently. A justification for any cruelty, any betrayal. Julian, bolstered by his mother's presence, finally seemed to find his footing. He straightened his tuxedo, his expression shifting from panic to a sort of resigned authority. "Mother's right, Isabella. This is for the best. For everyone. For everyone, Isabella looked at the three of them, Julian the coward, Amelia the victor, Genevieve the architect. They were a united front of treachery and greed. They had planned this. They had orchestrated the end of her life as she knew it, without a second thought for her. The fight went out of her, replaced by a deep, chilling clarity. She wasn't going to win. Not here, not today. Surrounded by them in this monument to their lies, she was powerless. Her only recourse was to escape. Without another word, she turned her back on them. She walked away, her steps unsteady, but deliberate. She walked past the shattered lilies, past the pyramid of champagne glasses, through the grand foyer, and out the heavy oak doors into the searing, indifferent California sun. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She got into her rental car, her hands shaking so badly she could barely fit the key in the ignition. As the engine roared to life, she caught a glimpse of them in her rear-view mirror, standing in the doorway of their palace. Julian, Amelia, and Genevieve. A perfect family portrait of monsters. She drove away from the Serafina estate, a name that now sounded like a sick joke. She drove with a shattered heart, a stolen future, and a secret in her womb that was now hers, and hers alone. The fairy tale was over. The war had just begun. The drive back to San Francisco was a blur of tears and tarmac. Each mile that separated her from Napa was a mile further from the woman she used to be. The naive, trusting Isabella was gone, incinerated in the cold fire of Julian's ballroom. In her place was a woman, hollowed out by grief, every breath a ragged effort. She stumbled back into the penthouse that was no longer a home, but a museum of lies. Every object, every photograph was a painful testament to a shared life that had been a unilateral fraud. A framed picture from their wedding in Lake Como mocked her. From the mantelpiece, Julian's adoring gaze, her radiant smile. She snatched it up and with a guttural cry hurled it against the wall. The glass shattered, echoing the sound of the broken lily vase, the sound of her own breaking. For 24 hours, she was adrift in a sea of despair. She didn't eat. She didn't sleep. She just sat on the floor, surrounded by the ghosts of her marriage, the Bulgari necklace box clutched in her hand like a cold, dead heart. The world had shrunk to the 4 walls of this gilded prison. On the second day, her phone, which she had ignored, buzzed insistently. It was Chloe. Isabella's finger hovered over the ignore button, but some instinct, some flicker of survival made her answer. Izzy. Thank God I've been calling you for a day. What happened? Did you tell him? How did he take it? Chloe's voice was full of cheerful anticipation. A choked sob was Isabella's only answer. What is it? What's wrong? The levity in Chloe's tone vanished, replaced by the sharp concern of a friend and the incisive focus of a lawyer. Through broken sentences and ragged breaths, Isabella told her everything. The drive, the house, the music, the dress. She told her about Amelia Thorne, Julian's pathetic excuses about business, and the final crushing blow of his mother's arrival. The only thing she kept back, the one secret she still guarded in the rubble of her life, was the pregnancy. It was too raw, too vulnerable to speak aloud yet. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Chloe finally spoke, her voice was stripped of all softness. It was the voice she used in a courtroom when she was going for the kill. That bastard, she said the words low and furious. That manipulative, spineless, cheating bastard. Okay, Izzy, I'm booking the first flight out of New York. I'll be there tomorrow morning. Don't talk to him. Don't talk to his mother. Don't answer any calls or emails. Do you understand? What's the point, Chloe? Isabella whispered. It's over. They've already won. The hell it is, Chloe retorted, her voice a steel whip. He committed fraud, Izzy. Marital fraud. He entered into a contract for a secondary marriage while still legally married to you. They didn't win. They just declared a war. They have no idea how to fight. Now you listen to me. Go and take a shower. Drink a glass of water. I'll be there tomorrow. We're going to burn them to the ground. Chloe's words were a lifeline. They didn't erase the pain, but they gave it a direction. For the first time in 2 days, Isabella stood up. She did as Chloe said, the simple acts of showering and hydrating feeling like monumental victories. The next day, just as promised, Chloe arrived. She was a whirlwind of decisive energy, her lawyer's briefcase in one hand and a bag of comfort food pastries in the other. She took one look at the shattered picture frame and Isabella's gaunt face and enveloped her in a fierce hug. We'll get you through this, she murmured. I promise. They sat at the large dining table, a place where Isabella had hosted so many happy dinner parties. Chloe laid out a notepad. Okay, tell me again. Every detail, every word. As Isabella recounted the story, Chloe took meticulous notes. When Isabella mentioned Genevieve Croft, Chloe's pen stopped. Genevieve Croft, she said slowly. The Ice Queen. She's the real power behind the throne. Julian is weak, but she's ruthless. She will see you as a liability to be managed and discarded. As if on cue, Isabella's phone rang. The caller ID was a private number. Chloe nodded at her. Put it on speaker. Isabella answered, her heart pounding. Isabella. The voice was unmistakable. Genevieve Croft. Cold, imperious, and utterly devoid of emotion. I trust you have returned to San Francisco and have had time to process the new reality. What do you want? Isabella asked, her voice tight. I am a pragmatist, as I hope you are. Genevieve continued, ignoring the question. There is no need for this to become a messy public affair. It would be damaging for everyone, yourself included. The press can be so vulgar. Chloe was scribbling furiously on her notepad, threatening me with public shame. The Croft family is prepared to offer you a generous settlement, Genevieve went on. A lump sum payment, the deed to the penthouse, and a non-disclosure agreement that will ensure your discretion and our privacy. Think of it as a severance package for your time with my son. Severance package. The phrase was so corporate, so clinical, so utterly insulting. It was the price of 2 years of her life, of her love of the child she was carrying. Isabella looked at Chloe, who shook her head subtly, her eyes blazing. I'll have to think about it, Isabella said, her voice surprisingly steady. There is nothing to think about. Genevieve's tone hardened. This is a more than fair offer. I will have our lawyers draft the agreement and send it to you. You have 48 hours to sign. After that, the offer is rescinded, and we will proceed with the divorce on our own terms, which I assure you will be far less comfortable for you. The line went dead. Isabella stared at the phone in horror. She's trying to buy me off and threaten me in the same breath. Of course she is, Chloe said, a grim smile on her face. This is good, Izzy. This is a mistake on their part. They're arrogant. They're underestimating you, and they're showing their hand. She tapped her pen on the pad. They want this quiet because they have something to hide. Julian mentioned financial trouble. A merger with Thorne. This sham marriage was the collateral. This isn't about love or romance. It's a desperate corporate maneuver. And you, my friend, are the inconvenient loose end. Isabella's mind went back to the Buvulgari Serpenti necklace. She opened the box and placed it on the table next to Chloe's notepad. "He gave this to me a month ago," Isabella said, her voice hollow. "Amelia was wearing the exact same one at the wedding." Chloe picked up the necklace, her eyes narrowing as she examined the exquisite craftsmanship. The snake. How fitting. A symbol of rebirth, but also of poison and deception. He literally branded both of you with his duplicity. She placed it down carefully. "This is more than an insult, Izzy. It's evidence. It shows premeditation. He was placating you while planning his new life with her. A jury would eat that up." A tiny spark ignited in the cold darkness of Isabella's heart. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was something harder, something more primal. It was the will to fight. "What do we do?" she asked, looking at Chloe, her truest ally. Chloe's smile widened. "First, we reject their insulting offer. Second, we file for divorce ourselves on grounds of adultery and fraud. But we don't stop there. A messy divorce is what they fear. We need leverage. You said Croft Industries is in trouble. We're going to find out just how much trouble." She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with strategic fire. "They think you're just a heartbroken wife they can sweep aside with a check. They have no idea you're about to become the biggest storm they've ever seen." The next 48 hours were a blur of calculated action. Chloe transformed the penthouse from a sanctuary of sorrow into a war room. Laptops replaced photo frames and legal pads covered the dining table. The first order of business was to formally reject Genevieve Croft's offer. Chloe drafted a letter so precise and frigid it could have frozen hell over. It stated simply that Mrs. Isabella Croft was not interested in their unconscionable offer, and that all future correspondence should be directed through her legal counsel. "This will infuriate them," Chloe said with satisfaction as she hit send. "Genevieve is used to people obeying. A no from you is an act of rebellion. It puts them on the back foot." The second step was filing for divorce. Chloe's petition was a work of art, a document that laid out Julian's transgressions in unflinching, damning detail. Adultery, fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress. She cited the planned wedding at the Serafina estate as a brazen act of bigamy in intent if not in law. "We're not just asking for a settlement, Izzy," Chloe explained, her finger tracing a line on the draft. "We're asking for discovery. Full financial discovery of Julian Croft and Croft Industries. If he claims the company is in trouble, and that's his excuse, he's going to have to prove it." He just opened the door for us to look at his books. While Chloe handled the legal barrage, Isabella was given a different task, one that was both painful and empowering. Chloe had hired a discreet private investigator, a former financial journalist named Ben Carter, who specialized in corporate malfeasance. Ben's job was to dig into the Croft Empire's finances, but he needed a starting point. "You lived with him for 2 years, Izzy," Chloe said gently. "Think. Were there any hushed phone calls? Any names you heard him mention in anger or frustration? Any trips that seemed odd? Any documents you might have seen?" Isabella at first drew a blank. Her memories were colored by love and trust. She hadn't been looking for clues of deception, but as she forced herself to revisit the last 6 months, small dissonant details began to surface. There was a project, Project Nightingale, she recalled slowly. He was obsessed with it. He said it was a new AI integration that would revolutionize logistics. But he was always so secretive about it. He once took a call in the middle of the night, and I heard him yelling, "The burn rate is unsustainable. We need a capital injection now." Chloe's eyes lit up. Project Nightingale. Ben. Did you get that? Ben, a quiet man in his 50s, who was on a secure conference call, grunted in affirmation. Got it. Burn rate means they're spending money faster than they're making it. Capital injection is code for we need a bailout. I'll start there. Isabella also remembered overhearing a heated conversation between Julian and his mother about a month before he left for Napa. Genevieve had been furious. You bet the company on Nightingale, Julian. You bet the family's legacy on a pipe dream, and now you come to me for a solution. It will work, Julian had insisted. It just needs more time and more funding. We don't have more funding. Genevieve had shot back. We have Marcus Thorne sniffing around our carcass like a vulture. Your recklessness has brought us to this Julian. To him. At the time, Isabella had thought it was just the usual high-stakes stress of their world. Now she understood. The marriage to Amelia wasn't just a merger. It was a bailout. Marcus Thorne wasn't just investing. He was feasting on their failure. Julian hadn't sold his soul for power. He'd sold it to cover a catastrophic failure. Armed with these new keywords, Project Nightingale burn rate capital injection, Ben Carter went to work. Within days, he began to paint a grim picture. Using a combination of public records, off-the-record sources in the financial world, and forensic accounting, he uncovered the truth. Project Nightingale Croft Industries' great hope was a colossal failure. The technology was flawed, the launch had been a disaster, and it had drained hundreds of millions of dollars from the company's coffers. Croft Industries was leveraged to the hilt bleeding cash and on the verge of insolvency. The stock price was being artificially propped up by a series of misleading press releases, a practice that bordered on securities fraud. The merger with Thorne Consolidated wasn't a partnership. It was a hostile takeover disguised as a marriage alliance. Marcus Thorne knew Julian was desperate. He had agreed to absorb the company, save the Croft name from public disgrace, and install Julian as a figurehead president. The price for this salvation was Amelia's hand in marriage, a medieval-style contract to seal the deal. My God, Isabella breathed, looking at the report Ben had compiled. It's all a lie. The whole company. They're a house of cards, Chloe said, her expression grim. And Genevieve's little NDA was meant to keep you from being the gust of wind that blows them over. If you were to go public with this, with the story of why he tried to marry Amelia and tie it to the failure of Project Nightingale, it would trigger an SEC investigation. It would cause a panic among their remaining investors. It would be the end of them. The power dynamic had shifted completely. Isabella was no longer the victim. She was the one holding the detonator. The weight of this knowledge was immense. For a moment she felt a pang of the old loyalty, a whisper of the love she once had for Julian. Did she really want to destroy him, to obliterate his family's legacy? Then she thought of him standing there in his tuxedo, telling her it was for the best. She thought of Genevieve, calling her a trespasser. She thought of Amelia's smug, victorious smile. And most of all, she thought of the tiny, innocent life growing inside her, a life that deserved a future free from the toxic poison of the Croft dynasty. Her resolve hardened into diamond. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. It was about ensuring that her child would never be a pawn in their cruel games. They're hosting the annual Croft Foundation Legacy Gala in 2 weeks, Isabella said, a new steely calm in her voice. She remembered the invitation on Julian's desk. It was the pinnacle of their social calendar, an event where they paraded their philanthropy and power in front of the city's elite. Julian will be there. Amelia will be on his arm. Genevieve will be presiding over it all like a queen. Chloe looked at her, understanding dawning in her eyes. Izzy, what are you thinking? They tried to erase me in private, Isabella said, her gaze distant and cold. They cast me aside in a secret, shameful ceremony. I think it's only fair that I reintroduce myself in public. She picked up the Bivulgari Serpenti necklace from the table, its diamond scales glittering under the light. She had once thought it a symbol of love, then a symbol of betrayal. Now she saw it for what it truly was. The serpent sheds its skin to grow. It is a symbol of transformation, and its venom can be lethal. They wanted a quiet, discreet settlement. Isabella said, a faint, dangerous smile touching her lips for the first time in weeks. Let's give them a legacy they'll never forget. The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel was not merely a room. It was the heart of the Croft Empire, pulsing with power and gilded prestige. Tonight it beat stronger than ever. Crystal chandeliers, vast and intricate, as constellations rained down a diamond-like glow upon the city's elite. The air, thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume, hummed with a symphony of influence, the clinking of champagne flutes, the murmur of stock tips, and the practiced laughter of people who knew their own importance. This was the Croft Foundation Legacy Gala, an annual masterclass in public relations where Genevieve and Julian Croft polished their family crest for the world to admire. Tonight their triumph was palpable. Julian, impossibly handsome in a Tom Ford tuxedo, moved through the crowd with a restored swagger. On his arm, a vision in crimson silk, was Amelia Thorne. Her presence was a living, breathing press release, an unspoken confirmation of the brilliant strategic alliance that had saved one empire and aggrandized another. They were a power couple in their glorious genesis, accepting congratulations with practiced humility. A bold move, Julian. Absolutely brilliant one. Banking magnate slurred, clapping him on the shoulder. We believe in a bold future, Julian replied smoothly, his hand possessively on the small of Amelia's back. Genevieve held court near the stage, a silver-haired queen surveying her domain. She was immaculate, her Chanel suit the color of burnished steel, her smile a masterpiece of controlled satisfaction. She had weathered the storm. She had navigated the family through her son's catastrophic failure and emerged stronger, her dynasty secured by this new lucrative union. The Isabella problem had been handled, a minor liability, settled and silenced. In Genevieve's mind, the ledger was balanced. The chapter was closed. They were all so confident, so secure in their victory, that not one of them noticed the subtle shift at the grand entrance. They didn't feel the first tremor of the earthquake that was about to bring their world crashing down. Outside in the cool San Francisco night, Isabella sat in the back of a black town car. The distant sounds of the gala were a muffled thrum against the window. She was wearing a gown of midnight blue silk, a column of quiet defiance. Her armor. In her lap, her hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and resolve. You don't have to do this, Izzy, Chloe said softly from beside her. She wasn't dressed for a party. She was dressed for battle in a sharp black pantsuit. We have enough. We can destroy them in court. Isabella drew a slow, shaky breath and looked at her friend, her rock. They tried to erase me in a silent, private way. They counted on my shame, on my grief to keep me quiet. If I let this happen only in a courtroom, it becomes a legal dispute. But what they did, it wasn't just illegal. It was a violation of a life, of a soul. She paused, her hand instinctively touching the Bevolgari Serpenti necklace at her throat. Its cold weight was a constant reminder. They need to be exposed, not just for what they did to their company, but for what they did to me. People need to see who they really are behind the donations and the smiles. Her gaze drifted to the hotel entrance. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but beneath it was a bedrock of pure, unshakable purpose. She thought of the life inside her, a secret source of strength. This wasn't for the woman Julian had shattered. This was for the woman she was becoming, and for the child who deserved a world free of the Crofts' poison. "It's time," Isabella said, her voice devoid of its earlier tremor. Chloe gave her hand a final firm squeeze. "Then let's go give them a legacy they'll never forget." Her arrival was not a grand announcement. It was a whisper that started at the edge of the room and turned into a deafening roar of silence. The doorman, recognizing her, simply nodded and opened the door. She stepped across the threshold, and the opulent warmth of the ballroom washed over her. A woman who had been friends with her at the country club saw her first. Her champagne flute paused halfway to her lips, her eyes widening in disbelief. She nudged her husband. He turned, and his jaw went slack. They whispered to the couple next to them, and so it began. A chain reaction of shock rippling through the glittering crowd. The hum of conversation faltered, section by section, like an orchestra losing its sheet music. The music itself, a string quartet playing Vivaldi, seemed to thin the notes, suddenly sounding fragile and exposed. Heads turned. Phones were discreetly raised. Whispers ignited. "Is that Isabella Croft? What is she doing here? I thought the divorce was final. My God, look at her necklace. Isn't that—" The wave of silence and whispers finally reached the stage where the triumphant trio stood. Julian was the first to feel the chill. He turned from a conversation, a charming smile still lingering on his face, and saw her. The smile did not just freeze, it shattered. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a sickly waxen pallor. The glass in his hand trembled, the champagne sloshing over the rim. For a horrifying second, he thought he was hallucinating, that his guilt had conjured her ghost to haunt him at his moment of victory. But she was real, a vision in midnight blue, moving towards him with a terrifying serenity. Amelia, feeling the sudden tension in his arm, followed his panicked gaze. Her perfectly made-up face hardened, the soft lines of her smile tightening into a venomous sneer. This was her night, her coronation, and this ghost from her fiancé's past had dared to spoil it. She squeezed Julian's arm, a sharp, possessive gesture meant to anchor him to her. But it was Genevieve's reaction that was the most profound. Her regal composure, forged over decades of corporate and social warfare, held firm. Her smile did not falter, but it became a rictus, a thin, bloodless line. A deep Arctic cold emanated from her, more chilling than any scream. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, narrowed into calculating slits. She wasn't just looking at Isabella. She was assessing a catastrophic security breach, a threat that had bypassed all her defenses to strike at the very heart of her empire. The liability had not been managed. The liability had just become nuclear. Isabella walked. Each step was deliberate, measured. She ignored the sea of gawking faces, the whispers that followed her like the train of a gown. Her path was a straight line cleaving through the stunned crowd directly toward the stage. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, but hers were fixed on her destination, the podium and the microphone. Julian, jolted out of his stupor by a sharp look from his mother, moved to intercept her. He blocked her path, his body a wall of desperate denial. "Isabella, what in God's name do you think you're doing?" He hissed, his voice a frantic, low growl. He grabbed her arm. "You can't be here. This is a private event. You need to leave, now." His touch was repulsive. She looked down at his hand on her arm, then up at his face, her expression one of utter detachment, as if studying an insect. She pulled her arm free with a slow, deliberate movement. "Can't I, Julian?" she replied, her voice perfectly calm and clear, yet carrying just enough to be overheard by the breathless onlookers nearby. "Last I checked, I am still Isabella Croft, and this is my foundation's gala, too." She sidestepped him without another glance, leaving him standing there, utterly neutered, his authority dissolved in front of everyone. She ascended the few steps to the stage, her silhouette framed by the foundation's enormous banner. The event's master of ceremonies, a local news anchor, stared at her. His mouth agape, cue cards forgotten in his hand. Isabella walked to the microphone. She adjusted it slightly, the small movement echoing like a gunshot in the cavernous, silent hall. She looked out at the assembly, 1,000 frozen faces, and took a final deep breath. "Good evening," she began. Her voice, amplified, was a melodic arrow of pure steel. "My name is Isabella Rossi Croft. For the past 2 years, you have known me as Julian Croft's wife. I see many of you are surprised to see me here tonight. I'm sure you're even more surprised to see me alone." She let the statement hang in the air, a formal declaration that the rumors were true. Her eyes swept the room before landing on the frozen trio at the side of the stage. "My husband and my mother-in-law," she said, her tone laced with a delicate, lethal irony, "have led you to believe that our separation was amicable, a quiet parting of ways to make room for a new and prosperous alliance with the Thorne family." She gestured gracefully towards Amelia, who looked as if she'd been slapped. "A business decision, they called it." "What you don't know," she continued, her voice gaining a righteous power, "is the true nature of that business. You see, Croft Industries, the legacy we are here to celebrate is not what it seems. It is a house of cards built on a foundation of debt and deceit." A collective audible gasp went through the room. The financial journalist in the front row, who had been watching with rapt attention, began typing on his phone with a speed born of pure adrenaline. His editor would be waking the entire newsroom. The flagship project that was meant to secure its future Project Nightingale has been a catastrophic failure, burning through hundreds of millions of dollars with no viable product to show for it. The company is insolvent. This was no longer just a marital drama. This was a financial bombshell. The air crackled with panic. Men in tuxedos were exchanging horrified looks, their minds no doubt racing through their stock portfolios. Julian and Genevieve Croft didn't want you to know that Isabella said, her gaze now locking onto Julian's. He looked like a man drowning his face, a mask of disbelief and ruin. They couldn't afford for the market to know the truth, so they found a solution, a bailout disguised as a marriage. Her voice dropped, becoming intimately conspiratorial, drawing every person in the room closer. The price of saving the Croft name from public disgrace was a wedding. A secret wedding planned while I was still his wife, living in our home, believing in our future. The deal was simple. Marcus Thorne's money and power in exchange for my husband. A merger sealed not with a contract, but with a wedding vow. She let the full sordid weight of the revelation settle. Then for the killing blow, she slowly raised her hand and touched the serpent necklace. The stage lights caught the diamonds, making them glitter like venomous scales. Julian gave me this necklace as a symbol of his love. A month later, he gave an identical one to his betrothed. I suppose in his mind it was a clever bit of emotional accounting, a way to keep his assets in order. Her voice thickened with a pain she refused to fully show. But what he failed to understand is that a woman's trust, a woman's life, is not a commodity to be traded for a better deal. She tore her eyes away from the wreckage of her husband's family and addressed the room one last time, her voice ringing with the clarity of absolute truth. I am not here tonight to ask for your pity. I am here to reclaim my name, Isabella Rossi, and to speak the truth that they tried to buy and bury. The Croft legacy, the one they are so proud of, is a legacy of lies. And it ends tonight. With that final devastating pronouncement, she stepped back from the microphone. For one breathtaking second, there was nothing but profound, stunned silence. Then the dam broke. Chaos erupted. 100 conversations exploded at once. Phones were out everywhere, broadcasting the fallout. Investors, their faces ashen, were already pushing through the crowd towards the exits, no doubt to initiate a sell-off that would bleed Croft Industries dry by morning. Genevieve's iron control finally snapped. The mask of civility disintegrated, revealing the raw, feral rage beneath. With a snarl that was shockingly animalistic, she lunged towards Isabella. Her hands clawed. But Chloe, who had moved to the side of the stage, stepped into her path, a calm and immovable object. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Genevieve, Chloe said, her voice dangerously soft. Assaulting my client in front of 200 witnesses and at least 30 recording cameras would be unwise. Genevieve recoiled, as if burned, her fury choked by the cold, hard logic of the law. Isabella allowed herself one last look at Julian. He was a ghost, a hollow man staring into the abyss of his own creation. He wasn't the man she had loved. He was a stranger she had once known. A weak king left standing alone in the rubble of his fallen kingdom. She turned her back on him, on all of them. The crowd, which had been a churning mass of panic, parted for her, instinctively creating a clear path to the door. Their expressions were no longer just gawking. They were a mixture of awe, pity, and a grudging, profound respect. She walked through them, her head held high. She stepped out of the grand ballroom, leaving the inferno of chaos behind her. The cool, clean night air hit her face a welcome balm. It felt like the first breath of a new life. The serpent had not just shed its skin. It had burned the whole forest down. And from the ashes she would rise. From a shattered dream in a Napa mansion to a triumphant stand in the heart of the city, Isabella's journey was one of unimaginable pain and incredible strength. She refused to be a silent victim, a footnote in a rich man's biography. Instead, she transformed her deepest betrayal into her greatest weapon, not for revenge, but for justice and truth. Her story is a powerful reminder that our deepest wounds can forge our strongest armor, and that true power isn't about wealth or legacy, but about the courage to speak your truth even when your voice shakes. She walked away not just from a marriage, but from a world of lies, ready to build a new life on her own terms for herself and the child who would now know only a legacy of strength. If Isabella's story of resilience and empowerment moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories of justice and redemption. Thank you for listening.